Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builders Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Rixson number EH345 8W. This is a top pivot in a through wire in a 626 finish. Let's quickly do a visual review. Well, here's the business end of it. What's different about this compared to a standard EH345 would be these two holes that are literally drilled right through the pin, top to bottom. Through there, those holes are going to allow you to run the wires, the low voltage wires. When I throw that walking beam down, that's how it's going to lock in place, obviously into the top of the door. Quick dimensional property of this. Overall length of the body. About 6 11/16 the width. About 1 1/4 inches or so. The component that goes into the top of the door, about 7 1/4 by about 1 1/4 inches. It's going to come together to look just like that. Okay. And naturally, every pivot's going to come with a finished plate, and that's going to be for the top portion only. Okay, so that's going to dress off like that. Whatever finishes you're doing, your bronze, your bronzes, your nickels, your chromes, your brasses, you're going to get your screw package at that point. And then, of course, the main event, what you all came to see, was the wires. This is an 8-wire, so 4 pair. Now, the bottom line is, why are you looking at this? What would you use this very unusual top pivot for? Let's talk about that now. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Well, clearly there's a need to get low voltage power into the door from the header, in this case, wherever it's ultimately coming from. Things that you could be powering on a center hung pivot, well, you could be powering lots of things, obviously. You could be powering glass, not with 8 pair of wires, but you could be powering glass. They make glass that turns from transparent to opaque with the presence of current. Obviously, you're going to have things like electric latch retraction. A door like this with a center hung pivot could certainly be double acting. It probably isn't in this application, but it could be. And it's probably center hung because of the desire to conceal the hardware. So we would very often sell a client a heavy-duty floor closer that would be center hung. And this same application would have a need to have electric latch retraction, or maybe an electrified deadbolt is what it would be. You could have, just because it's center hung doesn't mean it has to be double acting. Again, it would be single acting. We just did a project where they did a heavy residential project, in fact, a couple of massive Rixson floor closers, and they needed to have access control happening, and getting power into the door was going to be required because they were putting the electric deadbolt in the door. Now, you could also put it in the frame. It's nice to have it in the door, though, because then you can have cylinder control over it very easy. It is center hung, but of course there's a stop applied, so they went with center hung because they wanted to conceal the hardware. Even though you pick up lots of problems with weather stripping an exterior door when it's center hung, they had to add the applied stop to this side of the frame, but then over here you needed a stop on the exterior side, okay? Because the pivot point was, well, I can't make my arm pivot. Well, I guess I can, but the bottom line is they needed access control. Now, 8 wires or 4 pair of wires is a lot more than just, a deadbolt on and off, but you can easily get to 8 wires really quick, in the sense that you could have monitoring over the bolt. So you're going to need a pair of wires for power. You could have monitoring over the bolt to know whether or not the bolt is projected, okay, or it's retracted. You're going to need a pair of wires for that. You could easily have a door position switch. You're going to need for sure a pair of wires for that. So right there, you're at 6 wires. You're going to definitely want a pair extra, a spare pair. So what I just said with latch retraction, door position monitoring, a bolt monitoring, you're at this really quick, is the bottom line. So it's easy to get to 8 wires really fast. In fact, I had a client order, different client, but he did have electric deadbolts. And this time we installed them in the frame. So the jamb was like 4.5 inch, and he wanted cylinders on both sides. So we got really long cylinders and had that put through the wrought iron structure that was being built. And he was doing an electric strike on a third opening. And he says, how many wires do I need to run? 10, I says. He says, that's impossible. Why do I need 10? And it was the electric strike. It was latch bolt monitoring. Is the latch bolt present or not? It was keeper monitoring. And then he had a door position switch. So there's 8 right there. And he says, I don't think I can run all that wire based on what I've provided. He says, well, then you won't have all that access control. You won't have the ability to write back to your access control all of those features. So 8 wire or 4 pairs, easy to get to really quick. Also, a trick that people do if they're going to be running higher voltage is they'll double up pairs so that you can carry greater voltage, because I believe these are 22 gauge, but we'll absolutely affirm what that is. So access control is where you're going to use this. This is also a 345. It's an H345 with an E. It's an electrified H345. Now, what is an H345? That's their heaviest duty top pivot that exists. This has a longer pin projection. That longer pin projection, from my understanding, is required in California, where they have earthquakes, and they want that longer pin going down into the top of the door. Okay, so should that door no longer be a rectangular, now it's a parallelogram, they have more of that pin projecting into the door, so that in that sort of event where the door goes like this, the door doesn't fall out because that pin is still intact. That's why that is. These are really easy to install. I have mortised and machined and installed pivots countless times. It's super easy. The first time you look at the template, it might be a bit of a drag, or maybe it doesn't feel like it's very accessible. You might not say, oh, I could do this. After you study it and you start to put 2 and 2 together, it's pretty easy work, and we'll talk about that. That's the contents of everything. That's why you're going to use it. You need to get power down into the door for some purpose, probably access control. Let's switch to the screen view and let's look at all of the supporting documentation. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Okay, here's the item that we are looking at. We have some photographs that we can review, and here it is. The box. There's the contents of the box. There's our pivot with the pin retracted. There it is with it extended. That projection is about 1.75 inches, by the way. Side view of that item. Close-up of how that adjustment of how you draw that pin, because that's directly linked. This comes down, this goes up. That's the door portion. That's what you're going to see if you were to be on a ladder and look at the top of the door. We have another set of photos to look at here. Side view of the door portion, a close-up of the bearing in the door portion. That's just a close-up of what those drilled holes look like through the pin. The top pivot with the finish plate, those 2 little screws, are included. You can always access the ball tip set screw in order to drive that pin up and down. Here are the wires that are included. 4 pair. And then there is your screw package. Okay, now we have a number of documents linked to down below. Let's stop and take a look at those. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Let's take a look at the supporting documentation that we have. First, the cut sheet, and here is our EH345. So what's important to note first is that this is a heavy-duty application. Can be used with center hung bottom pivots or floor closers where pivot point is 2 3/4 inch or greater from the edge of the door is what they're saying. So the edge of the door over to the vertical axis of pivoting needs to be 2 3/4 inch. They've got a dimension of 2 inch from the edge of the pivot to that center line, and that is on the door portion. The header portion's closer or further away from the door edge. When you are doing a project and you need to make a modification to an otherwise standard pivot set, what you end up doing is ordering the pivot set LTP or less top pivot, and then you add that additional piece as a separate line item. So if you needed to do, you know, that floor closer that I had mentioned earlier, there's no way to order that floor closer with incorporated with a transfer top pivot. So we literally specified that line item as LTP, and then we added a second line item for that top pivot, is how that's done. For doors over 8'6" in height, specify the quantity of wires. They can do electrolinks, and all that is a Asa Abloy quick connector, so that when the hardware arrives, it already has the connectors attached, and that's going to be a nice way to be able to quickly connect material together rather than having just these wires that are hanging that you'll need to terminate. Not a big deal, obviously, but you know, if you're doing 10 openings or 100 openings, yeah, you're going to want quick connectors. Specify the quantity of wires. You won't ever really see a 2-wire. They say a 2-wire is available in 18 gauge, not with electrolinks, but 4 is generally the minimum that you'll ever find on transfer hardware, because if you're just doing a job or an application that requires only 2 wires, it's awfully nice to have a spare pair of wires, is the bottom line. So that's why you'll see 4 and above as available. Furnished with wood and machine screws. Longer pivot pin engages the top of the door 1 3/4 inch. Ideal for locations where there's a fear of dramatic building settling. That's that California code I mentioned earlier about earthquakes. It's called the walking beam type pivot, and that's a reference to the construction of the unit as we had discussed. That's obviously a 2-wire that they're showing us there. And this is a fully concealed. It's fully concealed in the sense that when the door is closed, you don't see the hardware. If you were to open the door to say 90 degree and look up, yeah, you're going to see part of the hardware. Center hung. Now center hung, that is a reference in the Rixson catalog. There is an exceptional description as to center hung versus offset hung, and I'm just going to go to the manufacturer's page. I'm going to open up the catalog, and we will get to the pivot section, and sure enough, right in the beginning of the catalog, they're going to show us the difference between center hung and offset hung. And rather than just draw this myself, center hung is when the vertical axis of pivoting is literally down through the thickness of the door. That's center hung. Offset comes in 2 varieties. Well, they're the same variety. They come in 2 different dimensions. 3/4 inch offset and 1.5 inch offset. That dimension is from the face of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting. It also happens to be 3/4 inch from the edge of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting. That's, I wouldn't say by coincidence, but that's not what they're referring to. They're referring to this. Face of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting. That's what's really important. This 3/4 inch is actually not important in many instances. I can't think of one that it's obviously important because that's the other dimension where your vertical axis of pivoting is rotating around. But you can very often have a dimension like 3/4 inch in a center hung application become 12 inch. That heavy duty floor closer I mentioned earlier, I think our 3/4 inch dimension, and it was center hung by the way, but I think they moved that over like 12 inches because it was a 5-foot wide door. 3/4 inch or 1.5 inches, that's got everything to do with the hardware's ability to get the door out and around some sort of wall condition. And what I mean by that is, if you have typical partition wall construction, you know, think of a knockdown drywall frame that you're going to see in a retail build-out space. Okay, and your vertical axis of pivoting is about there. 3/4 from the face of the door, 3/4 from the edge of the door. Then that door gets out and open. It's going to have no trouble at 180 degrees clearing. What I'm trying to draw here is when it goes from here to here to here. It's going to have no trouble getting around that clearance. So a 3/4 inch offset would be just fine. Actually, you can get by with a smaller offset. But imagine for a moment now that you had this was a block wall, and now or an existing masonry opening, and our frame was going to be set in here. Now you've really got to start to think, how far out do I need to get my vertical axis of pivoting to get that door safely around if you need to go past 90 degrees. So that's what the 1.5 inches versus 3/4 has everything to do with. Is it going to give you the proper offset of vertical axis of pivoting to get around any wall condition that there might be? There's a formula for wide throw that you can find from hinge manufacturers, and Rixson doesn't really make hinges. A sister company of Rixson's who will have it would be McKinney. It'll be in their catalog. So that's the difference between center hung and offset. And those two terms, center hung and offset, get thrown around so often that, you know, it's the first thing that you should know when you're talking about pivots. What type of pivot is it? Okay, here we are. Top pivot for power transfer. You know, they call them electric hinges or electrified hardware. It's not electrified in the sense that there's no electronics on it. It's just allowing the transfer of power. A center hung pivot is a non-handed piece of hardware. It can swing in either direction, and you know, it's only the frame or the application that will make it a handed piece of hardware. That closer I had mentioned earlier, it could double act, but the way the stops were added prevent that door from double acting. Earthquake tolerant, that again has got everything to do with the length of that pin, and again for taller doors. Now let's take a look at, this is called the template. And the template and the installation instructions are basically the same document. And I have the installation instructions here. They basically just add the obvious steps. So the template is a technical drawing of the hardware, shows you the size, basically gives you every dimension that you need when it comes to mortising the door or prepping the door. All the same dimensions are on the installation instructions, so we'll just focus on this document. There's your header portion, the length of the top plate, the width. They show you in cross section what you need to account for in terms of thickness. Let's study that a little bit. This would be the underside of the header. This line right here. They're saying it's 9/32 of an inch to what the underside of what would be a reinforcement would be. So if it's a wood frame, you're going to have to mortise 9/32 deep. So just heavy on 1/4 inch. And then of course you'll do it 6 3/4 wide, and then 1 5/16. 6 3/4 in length, 1 5/16 wide, or depth. That tells you everything about the header portion. Now the door portion, same logic. 1.25 inches wide, 7 and 9/32 length. The thickness of that item is 1/4 inch. We've discussed all the dimensional properties with the exception put it. I know what size to make it, but where do I put it? Well, that's easy. Okay. It's easy because they're giving it to us. It's determined by closer or pivot. So now we have to look at another template. So let's say that we're using this with a heavy-duty floor closer. And what we'll do is let's open up the product catalog again and find us a part number for a heavy-duty floor closer. H28, I think, is the closer that I used on that job. So this is a well, this is a single acting closer. Maybe those were not double acting. And so the top pivot template refers us to the bottom of what you're doing. So let's find us a template for the H28. I have the manufacturer's catalog open. We'll click on templates, and then we're going to go to closers and accessories, floor closers, heavy-duty floor closers, certainly. I'm just going to do a Control F on my keyboard for H28. And it shows up a number of times. Actually, you can buy an E version. It's not the one we want. So we don't have a 587. This was indeed a 587. The job that I did was for a 587 arm. That's just the way. That means it's going to be a side load. Pardon me. Yeah, a side load is what it's called. So we did an H28, and now what I'm looking for here is that vertical axis of pivoting. And they give it to us. It's right here. 2 3/4 inch from the jamb to the center line of that vertical axis of pivoting. So I've pulled up the bottom portion of what we're using and lifted it from here. So literally, the jamb to the vertical axis of pivoting is 2 3/4. Whatever your margin is, say 1/8 of an inch, it'd be 2 5/8 from the edge of the door to the center line. So that's what you're going to prep and wear. Prepare door and frame for the details. Yeah, the details are right above. To ensure proper door operation of door, the center line of the top pin must be straight and plumb with the bottom spindle. Absolutely. That's a mandatory guide to follow. Connect wires in door frame and install jamb portion with pin retracted. When you install the hardware, the pin has to be drawn up into its housing. You'll take the door with all of the hardware connected, you'll set it on the bottom pivot or closer, and then tip it into place, and then draw the pin down into the top of the door, which is step 4. Pull the wires through the bearing hole, connect the wires in the door, install door portion, and basically you're just terminating the wires at that point. I think what they're saying here is in step 5 you're going to have, obviously you're going to have wires already in the door. You'll have a raceway or a conduit, and wires will be coming up to that area where the top pivot's going to be located. So you're going to need to make your connections there, stuff those wires back down, and you're going to need to feed that through. The wires and the door have to go in. The steps of actually connecting those wires is somewhat delicate because, connect the wires in the door frame and install the jamb portion with the pin retracted. And now you've got the top portion installed in the header with the pin retracted and wires hanging down. Bring the door to within 2 feet of the jamb, so that's going to be a multi-person job. push wires through door portion bearing hole and connect wires on the door. So that lead that's hanging out of the header has got to get stuck down through this hole. Make your connections. In the door. And then install that door portion. Apparently that plate is not attached at that point. And as you move the door up to the vertical position, you're going to be pulling the slack of those wires. And at the very end, you'll have to be quite careful because you only have a very small margin between the underside of the header and the top of the door. You'll have to be very mindful not to pinch any wires. Then you'll engage the top pin by turning that adjusting screw and drawing the pivot down, and then test your wires for continuity at that point, and you're in good shape. That is how that is. Now there is a link below this video, as I said earlier, to the manufacturer's page. When we click on that, we can pull up not only all of the Rixson products that we sell by means of this horizontal navigation, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, and then again a link to the full product catalog. Let's wrap up this video on camera. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Let's get an idea of what it takes to get those wires pulled down through that top pivot. I'm just, ow, mommy. Let's get those wires separated. Yeah, okay. I was counting 7 for a minute. Let's get the ends of these wires cleaned up a little bit. I'll pause the video while I do that. Now let's take our top pivot and let's get it into the retracted position, which is where which is how they want it. Trying to do this without a screwdriver. It's only about 6 feet away, but I'm going to use something at hand. Okay, so a couple of holes there for the wires. I think what I'd like to try to do is, let's just take 4 of them, seeing as how there are 2 holes. Let's give those a little twist. Sure enough, those wires, that hole is just the right size to get 4 of those through there. The other 4, I just grabbed 4. I wasn't concerned about what color. I don't, they're only color coded just to separate one from the other. You know, obviously, you know, if you're doing some job where you are color coding the rest of the other wires, yeah, sure. It goes in there really nice. It's a very clean fit. So there's your installation. Nice. Now, the name Rixson is synonymous with pivots and have been for a very long time. I did, it's worth it. Let me switch back to the screen view. I'd like to show you something. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscriing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. I had mentioned earlier that I had an old catalog. On the manufacturer's page, there's a catalog here from 1920. That document is open. You wanted to see what Rixson was doing 100 years ago. Here's the book. You're going to notice really quick, the stuff just doesn't look that different. I find manipulating it here is easier. Friction stay. Yeah, I mean, so they had overhead stops, holders, a long time ago. Surface mounted door closer they're showing here. Floor closer mounted here. This is a number 10 and a number 15. We have a repair service on these. Our record is from 1904 in terms of the oldest Rixson closer that we have ever repaired. So keep in mind, if you have a really old floor closer in a commercial application or in even a residential application, it's not uncommon to see them there. We can repair that for you. Neat. Okay, now let's wrap up this video on camera. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Now, by the time you're seeing this video, there very likely could be additional archival catalogs that are there. We upload those time to time. It's a bit of a hobby, so to speak, to have those catalogs available. If you have any questions on the EH345, power transfer, heavy-duty top pivot, or any other Rixson product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you. Again, thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up. Please subscribe and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.